in theory. But that's the evidence that you're bringing to bear. Or this works with mixed ethnicity communities anywhere in the world. Or this works with students learning in a second language anywhere. So it's that kind of much more global shared knowledge. Okay. So it's verified by the outside of the group. So in the traditional kind of way that we have peer review of our discipline research, we then have peer review of our pedagogic research. It's public knowledge and it's generalizable. So when, now this is might kind of sound a bit, well, it is kind of a bit bizarre, but in terms of ethical approval in the UK particularly, if you move from scholarship to research, that's when you need ethical approval. Okay, so if you're just doing scholarship and it's only informing your community and your university, then you don't need ethical approval. But if you're getting generalizable results and it's classified as research, then you do. And it's kind of a little bit of it's kind of a distinction that's been inherited from the health professions, where you didn't need ethical approval for basically audit and service evaluation. If you're doing, if you're doing some new way of injecting a drug or what have you, but it's not, it's the same drug and all the rest of it, and all you're doing is evaluating whether it was as effective as the way you did it before. That's service evaluation, and it's not really classified as research, because everybody that's coming into hospital is getting that same technique, and you're just evaluating that service. So they wanted to distinguish that between research, where there might be randomization and all these other things in there. A very jolly tune. Okay, so I don't want to kind of go on too much about the difference between sort of scholarship and research in terms of the ethics, because if you don't have ethical approval for anything, it's a distinction that is not relevant at the moment. But it's certainly something, if you go to a UK institution, you need to think about, that you can't suddenly launch into doing pedagogic research without getting ethical approval. But the key things is this, who is it that you're informing of what you're doing in terms of how you're sharing that knowledge? Where's that knowledge going? Personal knowledge, local knowledge to your discipline or community or your institution, or public knowledge? It's generalizable beyond your field. Okay? So scholarship then is obviously reflecting on your current practice, and a lot of this is the same as reflection. Identify the issues that you wish to enhance, and of course we've been talking about that for a few days. Using pedagogic research evidence to identify an appropriate intervention. So this is perhaps where we're starting to look beyond ourselves. So we're looking to the literature, we're looking to evidence from colleagues or from wider afield to say, okay, what is it I'm going to try differently? What's the evidence for what I'm going to do differently now? And then implementing the change in your practice, and again, evaluating the impact. So I would actually say that reflection is just reflecting on your practice and implementing a change, but you need to get that evaluation and get that dissemination of the impact for it to start looking like scholarship. And there is definitely a blurred line between all of these things. They're not hard and fast borders. So you mentioned there that there's not much scholarship activity in the disciplines here in Turkey. Certainly in the UK, it's starting to get more and more credibility. So, there's people have been a little bit sniffy about scholarship. So I come from an engineering background, and I want nice quantitative, hardcore data. And I kind of sort of think, well, this sort of scholarship and pedagogic research is all a bit fluffy, and we're not. You can kind of basically get the evidence to say anything that you want. Okay, and that I suppose even 10 years ago it pretty much did look like that, but it's starting to get much more robust, and certainly now the sort of scholarship type journals are expecting much more evidence. So they don't just kind of want, well, I did this. I introduced this intervention with my students this year. I did a student evaluation at the end. They all loved it. That's not going to get you a paper. It's going to have to be, 2 or 3 years of evidence, maybe looking at different cohorts, looking at historical, comparing the data with what was happening before. It's starting to have the requirement of much more robust evidence to get yourself published in scholarship activities. So it's starting to become a little bit more credible in the field, if you like. So it's these 5 principles of good practice for scholarship. It's obviously it's focused on the student learning, if it's about scholarship of learning and teaching. It's grounded in the context, so it has to have the context of the discipline or the context of the pedagogic techniques. And the actual evaluation methods should be sound. So you need to be using robust techniques, and they can be quantitative or qualitative or mixed methods, but you need to have that sound methodology to generate your evidence. Ideally, it should be conducted in partnership with students, because you are experimenting on them to a certain extent, and it's better if they're partners in the research. And there's a lot of work now in the UK, Australia and other places about having the value of having students as partners in research. It teaches them how to be researchers, gets them to understand how you collect data and the validity of the data. So it's a really important aspect, and it certainly can help you with collecting data and analysing data if you're starting to do a large project. It does bring up issues about anonymity of data and information, but that's an aside. And it should be appropriately public, so it's being disseminated to the right places. So if you're asking students to participate in research, asking them for their data to collect and analyse, then you need to be sharing the findings of that. You're investing your time in analysing this stuff. You need to be sharing that practice, sharing the outcomes. But of course you need to be careful about anonymising students' names and that kind of what you see a lot of, or maybe not a lot of, but if you're looking at if we give an example of women studying STEM subjects, and you kind of say, oh well, in this class there was only 2 women that were out of 30 that were doing the subject, and then you talk about them and you talk about their comments, it can be quite easy to work out who it was you were talking about, And similarly, if you're teaching a program and there was only 2 or 3 older students, or there was only 2 or 3 ethnic minority students, it's quite easy to work out who those people were, even if you haven't named them. People just go, all right, yes, can work out who that was. So you have to be quite careful about that aspect of it. So in terms of the sort of the dimensions of pedagogy, and here I don't mean pedagogic research, but I mean the pedagogy that informs scholarship and pedagogic research. It's thinking about pedagogy around what is a good, how basically back the idea of how students learn and therefore how you should be teaching, and research around that area. And then thinking about your practice, your delivery, and doing research around that. And then experience, so how did the students experience what they were receiving, okay? So you can sort of think about the teacher behaviours, the processes, what the teacher's doing, you can do research around that. You can think about the products, and my research tends to be about the products, what were the outcomes of my changing my technique, so it's focusing on the outcome rather than the inputs. And so scholarship, can be informed by reflecting on the content. What's taught. Are we wasting our time focusing on certain parts of the content? Last module with you, I was talking to you about the threshold concepts, and if we just focus on threshold concepts and allow students to gather the other understanding of the other ideas, reflecting on the process and how things are taught. And then reflecting on the why. Why are we doing it this way? Why are we still using this traditional technique? And this is just, this is a bit of a sarcastic slide, but within education sectors, it's not really valid unless you've got a nice circle diagram. So I have one with 4 eyes, and this is kind of really my view on scholarship. Identify the issue. What's the problem? Inform yourself. So in your discipline, if you were thinking of a new research area or moving to a slightly new research area, you wouldn't just like launch into it and start doing experiments or designing experiments. You would read all the literature around. And for some reason, when people start doing scholarship type research, they don't think about reading the literature first. I really don't know why. I don't know if they just don't know if there's very much there. But, you know, a lot of stuff that you see, and I review stuff for journals, and people say, oh, I've got this great innovative thing, and da-da-da. And then you find, you know, people have been doing it for 20 years, and they haven't referred to any of this kind of, you know, backstory in their work. So inform yourself, find out what other people are doing, and then think about, well, actually, that's a completely different context to what I'm teaching here, so therefore this is a new context on that, and you can compare them. Or, you know, or is it actually, yes, they've already got all the evidence, and this is nothing new that I'm doing, I'm just introducing it here. Implement your strategy, so how are you going to make the change, and then evaluate the impact. So a lot of those things we've talked about already, but I think the key part here is how you're informing yourself. What evidence are you using to make the change? Okay, so we've already done the first part of that. You can change your issue or challenge, because you might think of something that you would actually be rather than a kind of internal change that you want to make to your practice, but a bigger change that you sort of think this could be the heart of a piece of scholarship activity. So there's some examples there. Is there something, new teaching or assessment method you'd like to try, new tools or technologies you want to try? And this one for my friend at the back there. Has there been changes in the university's policies or procedures or strategies that have made you change the way that you deliver something? Are there changes you want to make on the basis of module feedback, or are there specific students within your cohort that needs particular help with specific topics? So try and think of either the issue that you've been thinking about previously to this, is that something that could form the part of a piece of pedagogic research? If not, think of a new challenge. And I just want you to brainstorm in groups with flip chart paper actually, or we can bring the board in, and just bring together all of the issues that you're facing, because then we're going to coalesce around some different challenges that you could take forward. Okay? So, here's an example. Reflecting on your practice and identifying an issue. I spend a lot of time writing feedback on student scripts. Nobody takes on board the comments I make. This is what I feel after writing comments on your fellowship application. Do they read it? Do they understand what I want them to do? So I heard that some colleagues are using audio feedback. I wonder if that would help. So I'm going to use this as a sort of running example as we go through. But that's one example of practice or an issue. So in your group, just write down, these are some challenges. Students don't do anything unless it's part of an assessment. I spend ages marking, NSS scores is our student survey scores on feedback. Maths and stat skills of our students are declining every year. These are just some examples of some problems that you might want to do a research project on, okay? But think about some yourself and then share them in your group, okay? There's a good one. I think our teaching is excellent. I wonder if I could identify what makes our teaching excellent. You know, you're top of the league tables, your student satisfactions are really high. What is it about our teaching that's really good that we can share with others? Okay, so these are just some examples. I want you to think of your own. Can you get together in groups? Can you go and try and work with people you haven't worked with so far? Share your particular challenges, and then we're going to move around the room and look at different people's challenges. Okay, so